Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the Blue Origin NS31 flight to space. First I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. In 2000, the founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, started a space technology company called Blue Origin. Its headquarters is located in Kent, Washington. The company is involved in several different projects, including the operation of a suborbital rocket called New Shepard. This vehicle was named after the astronaut Alan Shepard, who was the first American to travel into space. New Shepard is 63 feet long, 12 feet wide, and weighs 165,000 pounds at launch. The spacecraft has two major components: a launch rocket that Blue Origin calls the propulsion module, and a pressurized crew capsule, which can seat up to 6 passengers. Both components are fully reusable. The space vehicle is controlled by onboard computers. No human pilot is involved at any level to fly New Shepard, not on board the spacecraft and not on the ground. Passengers in the vehicle must simply have faith that the computer will make the right choices. There are no flight controls inside. They could not deliver flight input even if they wanted to. Here is how a New Shepard mission functions. The spacecraft launches from a site 30 miles north of Van Horn, Texas, referred to as Launch Site 1. The rocket is powered for 110 seconds, which propels the spacecraft to an altitude of 25 miles. The spacecraft has a tremendous amount of momentum at this point and continues higher even after the rocket is deactivated. It crosses the Kármán line, which is 62 miles above sea level. This is the line that separates Earth's atmosphere from space. At this point, the crew capsule and the rocket separate and begin their journey back to Earth. The rocket lands vertically 2 miles from the launch site by reactivating its engines. The total flight time for the rocket is 7 minutes. The crew capsule stays in space longer. The crew experiences a few minutes of weightlessness. At this point, the capsule descends back to Earth. 3 parachutes deploy to slow the descent. Only 1 parachute is actually necessary, so 2 can fail and the capsule will still be okay. The capsule then makes a very gentle touchdown at only 2 miles per hour. The total flight time for the capsule is about 10 minutes. On July 20, 2021, New Shepard completed its first mission with a crew, which included Jeff Bezos. The mission was designated Blue Origin NS-16. After this successful mission, New Shepard continued to transport passengers into space, including some people who are well known, like William Shatner. He flew for free, as did a few others, but many people had to pay for the privilege of traveling into space. Blue Origin has not revealed the price of a ticket, but they require a $150,000 deposit. There are different theories out there as to the total cost, maybe $200,000, $300,000. Some people think it's closer to $1 million. Either way, it's a lot of money. In addition to passenger missions, New Shepard also completed missions where it carried commercial payloads. Now moving to the timeline of the incident. On April 14, 2025, at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, Blue Origin launched New Shepard on mission NS-31. This was the 11th mission carrying passengers. There were 6 passengers, all of whom were women. 3 of the women were well known: the television personality Gayle King, the singer Katy Perry, and the fiancée of Jeff Bezos, Lauren Sanchez. The other 3 passengers were an engineer, a film producer, and a civil rights activist. The launch commenced without any problems. The total flight time was 10 minutes and 21 seconds. Now moving to my analysis. Blue Origin has vigorously promoted mission NS-31. They made a big deal about it and acted like it was historic. This has led to a significant quantity of criticism. Here are a few examples of the concerns offered by various people. What did these passengers do to advance science? Usually when people go into space, there is some scientific goal. In what measurable way was this mission significant? Blue Origin marketed this flight as a milestone for feminism, yet it was largely funded by Jeff Bezos. It doesn't help that the shape of New Shepard makes people think it's the embodiment of a man's personal insecurities. Here they have a group of women making history launched in a rocket that looks like it should come with a safe word. Is it really wise to spend millions of dollars on what amounts to a publicity stunt when inflation and the cost of living is a major concern for so many Americans? The price of eggs is out of control, and these people are launching what looks like a flying midlife crisis into space. One particular area where a lot of people become angry involves how Blue Origin refers to the passengers as astronauts. Technically, anyone who has reached an altitude of 50 miles becomes an astronaut. This is 12 miles lower than the altitude reached by New Shepard. The problem is, when that definition was created, space tourism did not exist. Nobody even imagined that people would be simply riding into space someday, like taking a bus to work. Critics argue that the passengers on NS-31, or any of the passengers on New Shepard missions for that matter, are not actually astronauts as far as the original intent behind the label. Blue Origin has embraced the idea of calling passengers astronauts. On their website, they have the words, "Fly to space on New Shepard." Below that, there's a button labeled, "Become an astronaut." Those two statements are unrelated. This is like saying, buy a Big Mac, become a nuclear physicist. A person can certainly have both experiences, but one does not cause the other. I think it's time to update the term astronaut to exclude passengers on space tourism trips. Historically, real astronauts have been required to do actual things in space, like there is a job which they had to perform. For example, push buttons, pull levers, offer worried expressions when looking at gauges, and proclaim, "Houston, we have a problem." As far as Blue Origin is concerned, the only thing a person needs to do to become an astronaut is sit in a chair in the crew capsule. By that logic, the next time I take a cruise to the Bahamas, I will return as a marine biologist. What Blue Origin is trying to do here, as far as their use of the word astronaut, is insulting to actual astronauts. This is not the only time the company has used terms in a creative or dubious manner. For example, according to Blue Origin, Lauren Sanchez brought mission NS-31 to life. They wrote, quote, "She is honored to lead a team of explorers on a mission that will challenge their perspectives of Earth, empower them to share their stories, and create lasting impact that will inspire generations to come," unquote. I'm not sure about some of their word choices here. When they suggest that Lauren Sanchez is honored to lead, do they mean sit in the seat next to the other passengers? This is like a random passenger on an airport parking shuttle saying they are honored to lead a courageous convoy of travelers on a harrowing 6-minute journey to Terminal C. Calling them explorers also seems like a stretch. I think somebody exiting the Spaceship Earth ride in Disney's Epcot theme park has more of a claim to that title. Despite the significant quantity of criticism, the passengers appear to assign a lot of significance to this mission. For example, Katy Perry thought the trip was important for humanity in general and for women. Gayle King responded to the criticism when she said, quote, "Anybody that's criticizing it doesn't understand what's happening here," unquote. I think she meant anybody who's criticizing. It's worth noting that when a reporter called Gayle King an astronaut, she indicated that she still cannot accept that word. Gayle demonstrated more common sense here than Blue Origin. I think it's worrisome as far as what counts as an accomplishment in modern society. What happens when a New Shepard passenger puts a flight on their resume? I can imagine a so-called astronaut being interviewed by an executive who is carefully scrutinizing their resume. The executive is like, "So, you're an astronaut?" The passenger responds, "That's right, I journeyed into space." "So what was your position? Pilot, engineer, cargo specialist, scientist?" "Well, my position was seat number 4. I sat there for 10 minutes and screamed. I am now ready to assume a vice president position in this company." It's amazing that Blue Origin, a company that sends people so high, can set the bar so low. Moving to the last question, what are my thoughts on this case? This is just an opinion. I think the critics have a good point when it comes to the use of the word astronaut. That seems a little bit ridiculous under the circumstances. The passengers on these missions are not astronauts. Even referring to them as the crew doesn't really sound right. Blue Origin is deliberately misusing terms to artificially inflate the significance of their space missions. As far as the criticism based on how the company is launching rockets when times are so tough for many Americans, does that behavior mean that the company is misguided or evil? In my opinion, no. They run a business, and their business involves launching rockets into space. If there are enough people willing to pay a large price for a seat so the company can afford to pay its bills, then it makes sense to keep launching rockets. Another criticism is how some of the passengers appeared to find meaning in their journey that other people aren't really observing. They believe the experience to be magical and life-changing. Here's how I look at this. People are permitted to find their own meaning in experiences. Some people may look at a flight on New Shepard as nothing more than an extremely expensive theme park ride. Others may see things differently. From their point of view, the brief journey into space could be an experience that helps them find meaning and purpose in life. It brings clarity to the reason for their existence. I can appreciate how reaching an altitude of 62 miles and looking down at Earth from that perspective would be pretty amazing. Definitely not something that most people will ever have the opportunity or the bravery to do. I don't think the passengers should call themselves astronauts, but they can call themselves people who had a once-in-a-lifetime experience that inspired them. I would imagine that being there in person and actually taking that 10-minute trip would be a pretty extraordinary experience. People who are skeptical about the value of such an endeavor may see things differently if they took that type of journey. Even so, I do have a criticism on this idea of finding meaning in life by going to space. A person does not need to take a trip into space to have an epiphany about their life. A trip to space may help, it may be a catalyst, but it is not required. If a passenger says, "I found something profound on this trip to space," that's a lot different than declaring that going into space is the only way to find something profound. In my opinion, the most revealing moments of life are not exciting, dramatic, or expensive. Beauty and meaning can be found in the ordinary, in the everyday, in the experiences that are common to all people. The most profound truths are grounded, not launched. Altitude is not the key to finding purpose in life, but I guess for some people, it does the trick. Those are my thoughts on Blue Origin NS31. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. One thing I've noticed over the years is how there are a lot of people who are fascinated by the idea of traveling into space. It is one of those dreams that is largely unrealistic for most people, but is still maintained by a massive quantity of individuals. Like, there are people who dream about it pretty frequently. It's pretty unusual for something that's so hard to obtain. One would think that goals like climbing Mount Everest, which is unrealistic for a lot of people, but it's more probable than getting into space, one would think that those type of goals would be more common. But I think for a lot of people, they really would love the opportunity to travel into space. I remember in the late 1980s when I was in high school, the school had a career day. So various presenters would come in representing occupations that students were interested in, and they would talk about them. So like there would be a lawyer, a business manager, an accountant, a pilot, an engineer, a banker, whatever. Like all these different people would come in, and they would go into a classroom, and the students would rotate into that classroom. And I think throughout the whole day, the students saw maybe 5 or 6 presenters. So each one presented for, say, a half hour, a little bit more. So you'd pick like which occupations you wanted to visit, and you would go to those various classrooms. So at that time, I had a lot of different possibilities. Everything was still a possibility as far as career. I ended up being a counselor. I have a PhD in counselor education supervision. But back then, I had no idea what I would end up doing. I wanted to be a lawyer, an aerospace engineer, a mechanical engineer, a military officer, a pilot, an executive, like a business executive managing like a manufacturing company or a distribution company or something like that. I had a lot of different ideas. So that day, among the other people I visited, I attended the presentation from a pilot they had. This was a commercial pilot. I think he was toward the end of his career, but he was actively flying. So he might have been maybe 60 years old, I don't remember, but definitely not early in his career. And I really expected him to kind of go through, okay, here's what is required to get the necessary certification. Here's what the airlines are looking for, like to make yourself competitive, to stand out from the crowd. I thought he would talk about like the military route. So become commissioned as an officer in like the Air Force, and they will teach you how to fly. And then you can take that to the commercial airlines and have a better chance of being hired. Whatever. I kind of figured that's what he would talk about. Maybe the daily life of a pilot, like what happens when you get up in the morning, when you go to work, like what do you actually do? Are there some surprising elements of the job that make it unpleasant or more fun than one would expect? How much money does it pay? Things like that, right? That's what you expect from a presenter on Career Day. Instead, the guy spent almost all the time that he had talking about how you could become an astronaut, like how being a pilot would give you a better chance of someday being an astronaut. Not a large chance, which he acknowledged, but just a better chance than if you were not a pilot. So really, his whole presentation was about, if you do this, if you pursue the pilot route, someday you could get into space. I don't think a large number of the students were interested in traveling to space. I certainly wasn't, and I'm still not. But this is the direction the guy went, and I did admire his enthusiasm for the topic, and it really struck me how important this was to him. Like, I just imagine this was something that he thought about every day. Like, I wish I would have had a chance to get into space. Like, I wish I would have become an astronaut. But either way, he never became an astronaut, and he wanted to let us know that here was our chance. Like, here's what we could do to maximize the probability of fulfilling really his dream, but that's okay. So that really stayed with me over the years. Out of all the presenters that day, he's the only one that I really remember. It was the pilot. The manager guy, I remember him a little bit too, but just one thing he said, which was, he talked about how you could inspire employees without paying them more. I thought that was an odd thing to mention, but either way, that's the only thing I remember from him, so not anything really significant. It was the pilot that made the impression, and that impression was made because of his dream of going into space and how he wanted to see that for everybody in the room, that opportunity. So fast forward now many years since the late 1980s to the current year, 2025, the year I'm making this video, and there are companies that are taking people into space who are not astronauts. No matter what they call them, they're not astronauts. But they are going to space. They are experiencing something that only astronauts had experienced up to that point. Pretty amazing. There are no physical requirements that I'm aware of. At least I imagine you don't have to be in great shape. Like, you just have to be in good enough shape to survive being in the seat for 10 minutes. There are no skills required. Like, you don't have to be an engineer or a cargo specialist or a pilot or a scientist or anything. You can just pay for a seat, although it's a lot of money, but you can just pay for a seat and they'll take you up into space. You can experience something that few people will ever get to experience. I know Blue Origin drew a lot of criticism with this whole flight. Maybe it was the celebrities. Maybe it was the way they kind of packaged it. It was kind of corny and tacky. But overall, I think what they're doing does make sense. It makes financial sense. At least it might. But I also think there's a lot of demand out there. There are a lot of people who would love the opportunity to travel into space. They recognize that it's something that few people will have the opportunity to do, and it's something they've always dreamed about. So I'm okay with what Blue Origin is doing. I think for their sake, they might want to tone down the focus on celebrities and make it more about how anybody can buy a seat and go to space. Make it seem more relatable. I think as well, they're going to have to bring the price down at some point, a lot, in order to not draw this type of criticism. But either way, as I mentioned, there are a large number of people out there who dream of space travel. So it makes sense that companies will rise up to meet that need. Whenever there is a dream that is possible, there will be a business venture that rises up that can make that dream a reality. So is going to space for everybody? No, but it is for some people. And I think those people should have the opportunity to pursue that dream to the best of their ability. Is going into space something that I would ever want to do? No. Now, even if Blue Origin called me and said that I could go for free, which I don't imagine they'll ever do, but even if they did that, I would have to turn them down. I am not interested in going to space. I'm pretty happy right here on Earth. But I can recognize that other people see things differently. And again, I think that people should be allowed to pursue their dreams.